My son slammed a folder on my kitchen table and said, "We're moving in tomorrow, Dad. Sign this, or we'll have you declared unfit." His wife's eyes were cold, already scanning my house like a prize she had won. They thought age had turned me weak. They thought the home I built with my late wife could be taken with threats and paperwork. But what they didn't see was the smile. I hid the kind of smile a man wears when he already knows how the story ends. Stay with me. This is just the beginning. The September sun leaned gently over my backyard, laying long golden strokes across the garden Margaret had once cared for, as if it were her own child. I still spoke to her sometimes, even if only in my mind, whenever I trimmed the roses she loved. The air smelled of earth and memory, and though my back hurt and my knees protested, it was the kind of pain I welcomed. Pain reminded me I was still alive, still capable. Out here, in the garden, time slowed down and the world made sense. It was in moments like these that I thought about how this house had grown with us. Margaret and I bought it when we were just two young dreamers with more determination than money. We painted every wall ourselves, one by one, our laughter echoing in empty rooms that slowly filled with life. We raised Ethan here. I can still picture him running down the hallway in his pajamas, a blur of energy and innocence, carrying a wooden toy plane that I had built him. Back then, every corner of the house told a story. Even the creak of the stairs was familiar, like the house had a voice of its own. Now the voice felt quieter. Margaret had been gone for 5 years, and Ethan's visits had grown less and less frequent over the years. Phone calls turned shorter, excuses grew longer, and when he did come, it was always with the air of a man who had somewhere more important to be. I told myself that was just life, that children grow, careers demand, and distance is part of aging. But I'd be lying if I said the silence didn't weigh on me sometimes, especially at night when the house felt too big for one man's footsteps. That Sunday afternoon, though, silence was broken not by memory, but by the sound of tires on gravel. Not just any tires, the sharp, impatient crunch of expensive rubber on my driveway. My heart sank even before I looked up, because I already knew. Ethan's car gleamed silver as it stopped, its polished body reflecting the sunlight in a way that seemed almost arrogant. He stepped out first. My son had grown into a man with sharp edges, his jaw clean-shaven, his clothes always precise, his shoes unscuffed. He carried himself the way men do when they're used to being listened to. Beside him came Claire, his wife. I had never known what to make of her. She was polite enough, but her politeness always carried the weight of calculation, as though every word was measured, every smile rehearsed. She dressed as if even family gatherings were boardroom meetings, dark suits, clipped heels, and that leather briefcase that never left her hand. They walked toward me, not like a son and daughter-in-law visiting for Sunday dinner, but like professionals arriving to inspect a property. Claire's gaze swept across the yard, not noticing the roses in bloom, not even pausing at the oak tree under which Margaret and I once carved our initials. No, her eyes scanned the house itself, the windows, the roofline, the patio, as though she were appraising square footage rather than remembering family history. "Dad," Ethan said finally when they reached me. There was no hug, no hand on the shoulder, not even a smile. Just a word, spoken with the tone of a doctor giving a reminder to a patient. "You shouldn't be doing this kind of work. The garden can wait. You could fall." I straightened up slowly, brushing soil from my palms. "I've been tending this garden for 40 years, I said evenly. "I think I can manage." Claire shifted her weight, her heels sinking slightly into the lawn. "Robert," she said, using my first name the way she always did. Not Dad. Never Dad. It was a small thing, but to me it felt like a claim of distance, a refusal to step fully into the family she had married into. This house, it's beautiful, but it's a lot. Managing it alone isn't just exhausting, it's impractical. Her voice was smooth, the kind of voice that could make cruelty sound like common sense. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked past them, back at the roses, Margaret's roses. For a moment, I thought about how she would have received them with warmth, with laughter, with food on the table waiting inside. She had always believed in family gatherings, in open doors. And here I was, watching her son and his wife standing on our lawn as though they were here to conduct business, not to visit. We walked together toward the patio, though I didn't invite them in. Ethan followed close, his hand brushing my shoulder briefly. Once, that touch would have carried comfort. Now it felt almost clinical, detached, like he was checking for fragility rather than offering support. "You've been on your own for a while now," Ethan said, his tone even but distant. "Claire and I, we've talked. We're worried about you. It's a big house, Dad. Too big. And sometimes when we talk, you forget things. Repeat yourself. We're just thinking about what's best." His words stung, not because they were entirely false. Yes, sometimes I repeated myself. Yes, sometimes I misplaced a name, but because of how he said them. Not as a son worried for his father, but as a professional presenting evidence, preparing to make his case. I glanced at him. For a split second, I saw that little boy again, the one who had once knelt beside me in this very garden, hands muddy, grinning from ear to ear as he held up a worm like it was treasure. But the vision flickered and vanished, replaced by the man before me, a stranger wearing my son's face. Claire adjusted the strap of her briefcase and looked directly at me. "You don't have to keep up this place on your own anymore," she said, her smile thin. "We've been thinking about ways to make life easier for you. Streamlining things." "Streamlining," I repeated softly, tasting the word. It felt cold on my tongue. "Yes," she nodded briskly. "Financially, emotionally, practically, it just makes sense." I didn't answer. I only stood there, letting their words drift into the late afternoon air, mingling with the scent of roses and the memory of Margaret's laughter. The house behind me stood tall and familiar, every brick and beam whispering of the life we had built. And as I looked at my son and his wife, so polished, so sure of themselves, I felt something stir quietly inside me. Not anger, not yet, but the first faint shadow of understanding. They weren't here just to visit. They hadn't come for Sunday dinner. They had come with something else in mind. And though I didn't yet know exactly what it was, I could feel it pressing at the edges of the silence between us, waiting to be revealed. We sat outside on the patio, the late sun drawing shadows across the stone floor, and for a moment it almost looked like a Sunday afternoon from years ago. Back then, Margaret would have brought out a tray of iced tea, Ethan would have been laughing with grass stains on his knees, and I would have felt nothing but contentment in the simple rhythm of family life. But this Sunday was different. The silence between us was heavy, the kind that didn't come from peace, but from calculation. Claire placed her briefcase on the table, as though it belonged there. Her movements were precise, efficient, like a banker arranging contracts instead of a daughter-in-law settling in for conversation. She smoothed the crease of her skirt before finally looking at me, her eyes sharp and steady. "Robert," she began, her tone calm but cool, "we've been looking at the numbers. Maintaining a property of this size, it just doesn't make sense for one person. You're carrying too much." I let her words hang there. I'd learned long ago that silence was its own form of strength, that people often revealed more than they intended when they tried to fill it. Sure enough, Ethan shifted in his chair, glancing briefly at her before leaning forward. "Dad, we're not saying you can't handle yourself," he said. His voice carried the practiced assurance of a man used to speaking with authority, yet there was something rehearsed in the way he emphasized each word. "We just don't want you to feel overwhelmed. A house this big, it's lonely, it's risky, and, well, we both think it's time we stepped in." Stepped in, the phrase struck me. Not helped, not supported. Stepped in, like taking over a position, assuming command. Claire folded her hands neatly on the table. "You've done an incredible job keeping this place up. Truly. But at your age, the responsibilities, they start to outweigh the benefits. We've talked about it, and we think it would be best for everyone if we shared the responsibility. If we lived here with you." There it was, not shouted, not demanded, just spoken with a calm certainty, as though the decision had already been made, and they were only informing me of the logistics. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked past them at the roses. The blooms were deep red, heavy with fragrance. Margaret used to say, "Roses teach patience. You trim them too quickly, you ruin the bloom. You wait, you endure the thorns, and in time they open on their own." I thought of her words as I sat in silence, enduring the thorns before me. Ethan cleared his throat. "Look, Dad, you'd still have your space. You could use the guest room near the den. It's cozy, easy to manage. Claire and I would take the master suite upstairs. That way, we'd be close by if you needed anything. We'd handle the larger responsibilities, finances, maintenance, upkeep. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." I finally turned to look at him. He spoke as if he were offering a gift, but I could hear the faint edge of impatience under his words. Claire, on the other hand, didn't even pretend. Her eyes had already travelled over the house, not seeing its history, not feeling the echoes of Margaret's laughter in the walls, but calculating square footage, resale value, potential. "You'd still be free to garden, of course," Claire added smoothly, as though she were offering me a consolation prize. "But the larger matters, the stress, let us take that burden." The burden. That was how they saw this home. Not as a sanctuary, not as the heart of a family, but as a weight, a problem to be solved. I leaned back in my chair, letting my gaze wander over the yard. Every corner held a memory. The oak tree where Margaret and I carved our initials the summer before Ethan was born. The deck we built one July, hammering nails side by side, laughing when one of us bent the boards crooked. The roses she planted the year Ethan went to college, because she said the house felt too quiet without him. Each memory layered upon the other, forming a foundation deeper than any mortgage could measure. And now, here were my son and his wife, speaking of it all as though it were nothing more than a set of accounts in need of balancing. "Mom would have wanted this," Ethan said softly, breaking into my thoughts. His words landed with a weight I hadn't expected. "She wouldn't want you managing all this on your own. She'd want you to be taken care of. To be practical." I turned sharply to him then, searching his face. He said it with such conviction, as if he truly believed invoking Margaret's memory would sway me. But I knew her better than anyone. Practical? Yes, Margaret had been practical. But she had also been fiercely protective of this home, of the life we built together. The thought of her memory being used as a bargaining chip ignited something cold and deep within me. For a long moment I said nothing. Ethan's gaze held steady, but I saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Was it doubt or calculation? Claire, meanwhile, smiled as if the point had already been won. "You've done so much for us already," Claire continued, her voice slipping into the cadence of persuasion. "You supported Ethan through med school. You've given us more than we could ever repay. This is our chance to give back, to take care of you." The words might have sounded generous to an outsider, but I heard them differently. I heard the polish of a lawyer's argument, crafted not for compassion, but for strategy. And I felt, deep in my bones, that this was not about giving back. This was about taking over. I let out a slow breath. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked at last. Though I already knew. Ethan leaned in, clasping his hands on the table. "We're moving in, Dad. Tomorrow. Everything's already arranged." The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding, and though my expression remained calm, inside me something shifted. A quiet, steady resolve began to form, not loud, not violent, but cold and certain, like ice spreading over a pond. They thought they had already won, but they had forgotten one thing. They had forgotten who I was. The silence that followed Ethan's declaration was thick, heavy enough to bend the air around us. I could hear the faint hum of cicadas in the oak tree, the occasional chirp of a bird, even the creak of the old wooden gate swinging in the breeze. Life continued all around us, but here at the patio table, time seemed to stop. My son's words, simple as they were, had shifted the entire balance of our relationship. "We're moving in tomorrow." I studied him carefully, searching his face for a flicker of hesitation, for some trace of the boy who once leaned on me for guidance. Instead, all I saw was determination, calculated, cold, unwavering. Claire, beside him, sat perfectly still, hands folded neatly, her expression unreadable but confident. She didn't have to speak yet. Ethan had played his part. She was waiting for her turn, and I knew it would come soon. Tomorrow? I repeated softly, more to myself than to them. Yes, Ethan said firmly. We've already arranged everything, movers, utilities, even the storage for the extra furniture. We'll bring what we need, and the rest we'll figure it out. The way he said we gnawed at me. It was not the inclusive we of family, not the warm collective of shared responsibility. It was the we of assumption, of replacement. Claire and Ethan together. Not Ethan and his father, not the family Margaret had built, but a new entity staking a claim on what wasn't theirs. I leaned back in my chair, letting my fingers trace the grain of the old patio table. Margaret and I had chosen this table together from a little shop on the coast. She had loved the way the sunlight caught the wood. Now, under that same light, her son sat across from me, turning her dream into a bargaining chip. You'll be more comfortable, Ethan pressed on. You won't have to handle the bills, the repairs, the stress. Claire can manage the finances better than anyone. I can check in on your health, make sure you're not overdoing it. You'll have company, Dad. Isn't that what you've been missing? Company. I nearly laughed at the word. What I had been missing was not company, it was family. The difference was stark. Family visits with love, with warmth, with care. Company arrives with luggage and a claim to your space. Claire finally spoke, her voice measured and deliberate. Robert, this doesn't have to be difficult. We're offering stability for all of us. The truth is, this house is too much for one person. It's fiscally irresponsible to keep it this way. We've been reviewing the numbers, and I held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. The numbers? I asked, my tone sharper now. She paused, perhaps surprised that I had interrupted. Then she nodded smoothly, adjusting without missing a beat. Yes. The property value, the cost of upkeep, taxes, utilities, it's all disproportionate. Consolidating households is the logical solution. It's not just about you. It's about preserving the family's assets. There it was, the word assets. Cold, detached, cutting. Not memories, not history, not love, assets. The house is paid for, I said evenly. It has been for over 20 years. No debt, no mortgage. I don't owe anyone a dime. That's true, Claire admitted, her smile polite, professional. But ownership isn't just about debt. It's about management. And managing alone at your age is a liability. I looked at her then, really looked at her. She spoke with the same calm tone she might use in a courtroom, presenting facts with an undercurrent of threat. She wasn't my daughter-in-law in that moment. She was a lawyer, and I was the opposition. Ethan shifted slightly in his chair. Dad, you're not hearing us. This isn't about taking something from you. It's about protecting you. We've noticed some changes, small things, forgetting dates, repeating stories. It happens, but it means we need to start planning ahead. N. There it was, the doctor's diagnosis without ever naming it. He wanted me to hear the word without him having to say it. Dementia. Incompetence. The subtle but unmistakable suggestion that I was no longer capable of managing my own life. I felt something twist inside me. 5 years of silence, of short phone calls and polite distance. And now here he was, diagnosing my decline without a shred of compassion. I remembered when he was a boy, when I stayed up all night during his fevers, when I taught him how to ride a bike, when I covered his mistakes so he could keep his confidence intact. And now he was measuring me against a checklist, deciding if I was still fit to live in my own home. Mom would have wanted this, Ethan said quietly, his voice softening just enough to sound convincing. He gestured to the roses nearby. She wouldn't want you clinging to the past. She'd want you to be practical, safe. That was the moment something inside me hardened, using Margaret's name as leverage, twisting her memory into a weapon. I clenched my hands beneath the table to keep them from trembling, but my face stayed calm. I met his eyes. And what do you want, Ethan? I asked quietly. The question lingered, heavier than any accusation. Claire was the one who answered. We want what's best for everyone. and that means making changes. Tomorrow we'll begin. We'll take the master bedroom upstairs. You can have the guest room near the den. It's comfortable, close to everything you need. We'll handle the rest." The certainty in her tone was absolute, as if the decision had already been made, and my consent was merely a formality. "No one," I said slowly, each word deliberate, "is moving into this house." The air shifted instantly. Ethan's expression flickered annoyance, flashing before the mask of calm returned. Claire's smile dissolved, her posture stiffening, her eyes narrowing like a predator finally showing its teeth. She reached for her briefcase and clicked it open, with the precision of a gavel striking. "Robert," she said, her voice dropping lower, colder, "we hoped this could be resolved amicably, but we are prepared for another path if necessary." She slid a leather-bound folder across the table toward me. The sound of it against the wood was louder than it should have been, sharp, final. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it contained. "You may not be fully aware," she continued, "of how conservatorship works in this state. If an individual demonstrates diminished capacity, the family has both the right and the obligation to intervene legally. Ethan has respected colleagues who can provide assessments. It would be a public process, Robert. Your medical records, your finances, all of it laid bare in court. That's not what you want, is it?" Ethan said nothing, but he leaned back, crossing his arms. His silence was confirmation. He had given her the stage, and she was playing her part flawlessly. Claire opened the folder, her nails tapping lightly on the first document. "This is a quitclaim deed. Your signature will add Ethan and me as joint owners of the property. Simple, clean, protective." She moved her finger to the second page. "And here is where you prevent us from filing for conservatorship first thing Monday morning." The ultimatum lay between us. My home, my independence, my dignity traded for the illusion of choice. They believed they had me cornered. They believed I was weak, frail, outdated. What they didn't know, what they couldn't see, was that every word they spoke, every threat they made, every piece of paper they slid across the table was fuel. Not for defeat, but for preparation. I looked at the folder, then at them, and slowly, I smiled. I didn't touch the folder. Not then, not in front of them. Instead, I let my hand rest lightly on the patio table, as if the decision were too heavy to lift. My silence unsettled them more than any outburst could have. Ethan shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening, and Claire leaned forward, sensing the moment to press harder. "Robert," she said carefully, "we're not here as adversaries. We're here as family. This is an opportunity to make a transition that benefits everyone. You'll be safe, the property will be secured, and we'll all move forward together. But we can't wait. Time is not on your side." Time. The way she said it made me sound like an hourglass, already emptied of sand, as if every second I held onto this home was reckless. But I had spent my entire life auditing other people's time, money, and choices. I knew time could be a weapon if you used it correctly. Ethan leaned forward. His voice softened, rehearsed. "Dad, we just want to help. Don't fight us on this. It doesn't have to be difficult." I studied his face, looking for some trace of sincerity. For a brief second, I almost wanted to believe it. But the truth was clear. He wasn't speaking as my son anymore. He was speaking as a physician, presenting his diagnosis: aging, decline, incapacity. And Claire, sitting beside him with her folder of documents, was the attorney ready to turn that diagnosis into a verdict. Still, I didn't rise to the bait. I drew in a slow breath, then exhaled. "Fine," I said quietly. Claire blinked, surprised. Ethan sat up straighter, his expression flickering with triumph. "Fine," I repeated. "We'll meet, but not here. If this is to be done properly, it will be done in my lawyer's office. Friday morning, 10 o'clock. David Sterling. You know the name, Ethan." The shift in the air was immediate. They hadn't expected agreement, let alone that I would dictate terms. For the first time, Claire hesitated. She recovered quickly, but I saw the flicker of surprise in her eyes. "All right," she said after a pause, closing the folder with deliberate care. Friday it is. They stood, adjusting their clothes, collecting their certainty like armor. Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder again, softer this time, almost paternal in its weight. "This is the right choice, Dad," he said. "You'll see." I didn't answer. I watched them walk back to their gleaming car, watched the taillights disappear down the driveway. Only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding. The patio felt colder without them, though the sun was still warm. The house behind me loomed heavy, familiar yet suddenly fragile, like a fortress that had been breached. Inside, the silence was deafening. Every object seemed to stare at me, the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking too loudly, the photographs on the mantel catching the light. Margaret's smile from the picture we had taken the day we finished the deck seemed almost alive, almost accusing. She had trusted me to protect what we built, and now her son, our son, was trying to dismantle it. I sat down in the living room, staring at that photograph of her. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have seen this coming." The truth was, maybe I had seen it coming. Ethan's distance over the years had not been innocent. Each call that grew shorter, each holiday visit cut in half, each excuse that seemed just a little too polished, it all led here. But I had blinded myself with hope. I had told myself he was busy, that success had a cost. I hadn't wanted to believe that the boy who once clung to my hand could grow into a man who saw me as an obstacle. I thought back to those years when he was young, nights spent helping him with math homework, weekends at Little League games, mornings when I'd wake before dawn to drive him to debate tournaments. Margaret and I had poured everything we had into Ethan, not just our love, but our money, our future, our sacrifices. I remembered the tuition checks, the private high school he insisted on attending because his friends were going there, the Yale tuition, then medical school. Every dollar I had saved, every investment I had made, went into his future. Margaret and I skipped vacations, skipped dinners out, even delayed fixing the roof one summer because tuition was due. Ethan never asked where the money came from. He just assumed it would always be there. And when he graduated, when he walked across that stage and became Dr. Ethan Carter, I felt nothing but pride. Pride, even though I knew the debt I had quietly carried for him. Pride, even though I knew I had liquidated part of Margaret's inheritance to help with his first condo in Beacon Hill. Pride, because he was my son. But pride has its limits, and sitting in my empty living room, hearing his voice echo in my head, "We're moving in tomorrow," I realized that every sacrifice, every gift, had been forgotten. Worse, it had been twisted into entitlement. I rose and walked to my study, the one place in the house that still felt entirely mine. Dark cherry wood panels lined the walls, shelves filled with books on finance and history, ledgers stacked neatly in the corner. Margaret had always said this room smelled like paper and patience. I sat down in my chair, feeling the familiar creak beneath me, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel old. I felt sharp, alive. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew as well as my own. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "David Sterling." "David," I said. "It's Robert." "Robert," he greeted warmly. "How are the roses?" "The roses are fine," I replied, "but the sun is not." The warmth vanished instantly. David and I had been friends long enough to speak in shorthand. "What happened?" I told him everything: Ethan's arrival, Claire's words, the folder, the ultimatum. I delivered it like an audit report, fact after fact, stripped of emotion. But David heard the truth between the lines. When I finished, there was silence on the line. Then came the eruption. "That arrogant. After everything you've done for him, a conservatorship, Robert, I swear, I will tear her apart in court. We'll fight this. We'll bury them in motions. We'll—" "David," I interrupted, my voice steady. "Stop. I don't need your anger. I need your precision. I need everything." He caught the shift in my tone. The loyal friend stepped back. The seasoned lawyer stepped forward. "Everything," he echoed. "Define everything." "And start with the education files," I said. "Every tuition check, Deerfield Academy, Yale, med school, all of it. There was a pause. I remember, David said quietly. Margaret was so proud. She was, I murmured. But pride doesn't pay debts. Next, the condo, Beacon Hill. The 20% down payment I gifted him. Pull the records. I have it, David confirmed. And then I continued, my voice sharpening. Find the intra-family loan agreement, fall of 2005. $350,000, med school tuition, 4% interest, compounding annually. There was silence, then a sharp intake of breath. My God, Robert, I had forgotten. You let him believe it was a gift. I let him forget, I corrected softly. The line was quiet for a long moment. Then David's voice returned, steady, focused. All right, I'll calculate everything, principal, interest, every cent, and I'll gather records of every significant gift you've ever made him. The first car, the practice loan, everything. Good, I said, because I intend to show my son the balance sheet of his life. When the call ended, I sat in the dark study for a long time, listening to the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. The grief that had threatened to drown me earlier was gone, filed neatly away. What remained was clarity, cold, precise, unyielding. The audit had begun. The night after Ethan and Claire left, I barely slept. The bed felt too large, the house too silent, and my thoughts too loud. It wasn't fear that kept me awake, not exactly. It was something sharper, something that pressed against my ribs like a blade, the certainty that a line had been crossed. My son, my only son, had looked me in the eye and told me he was moving into my home, as though I were a tenant, and he the landlord. And worse, he believed I would yield. I stared at the ceiling for hours, Margaret's memory beside me in the dark. She had been gone for 5 years, yet in moments like this, she felt closer than ever. I could almost hear her voice telling me to hold steady, to keep my ground, to remember who I was. By the time the grandfather clock downstairs struck 4, I knew there would be no more sleep. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my knees aching, and whispered into the empty room. You always said I'd outlast the storms, Margaret. Let's see if you were right. Joel. In the kitchen, I brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The smell filled the house, rich and bitter, grounding me. As I sipped from the chipped mug Margaret had always favored, I dialed David Sterling's number. He picked up on the second ring, his voice clipped but steady. I've been expecting your call, he said. Then you know why I'm making it, I replied. I've already started digging, he admitted. Education loans, tuition checks, the condo down payment. You'd be shocked at how much paper trail there is when you've been as generous as you have. I'm not shocked, I said. I kept every receipt. He paused, and I could almost hear him smile. Of course you did. Old auditors never really retire. Over the next half hour, David laid out what he'd found. Each number landed like a gavel strike. Deerfield Academy, $85,000. Yale, $220,000. Medical school loan, $350,000 at 4% interest, compounding. Beacon Hill condo, down payment, $120,000. The first car, a graduation gift, $15,000. The practice loan for Ethan's first private clinic, $85,000. Total, over $1.6 million, nearly $2 million once interest was included. I set my mug down carefully, watching the steam rise and twist in the light. $2 million, not in abstract wealth, not in property speculation, but in sacrifices, vacations unspent, repairs postponed, even Margaret's inheritance, carved away piece by piece, all to build the future of the boy who now threatened to declare me unfit. Do you want me to prepare a full ledger? David asked. Yes, I said, line by line, item by item. When the time comes, I want to hand Ethan the balance sheet of his life. End of chapter. That morning, after our call ended, I began my own kind of audit, not of money, but of memories. I pulled boxes down from the attic, each one coated with dust, but heavy with history. There were photo albums, yellowed letters, Ethan's childhood drawings of planes and cars. even Margaret's notes, scribbled in the margins of cookbooks. At first it felt sentimental, as though I were distracting myself with nostalgia. But as I laid them out across the dining room table, I realized they were evidence, proof that this house was not just timber and stone, but the vessel of a life lived. Proof that my son's story had been written in these walls long before Claire ever appeared with her briefcases and clipped words. By noon, the phone rang. It was Ethan. "Dad," he said, with a cheerfulness that sounded rehearsed, "I've been thinking. Once Claire and I move in, you won't have to worry about groceries or bills. We'll handle all that. You can just focus on the things you enjoy. Gardening, reading, maybe even traveling a little." I let him talk, filling the silence with promises of convenience. He didn't hear how hollow they sounded. He didn't understand that freedom wasn't measured in groceries delivered or bills paid. Freedom was measured in dignity, in the ability to decide when and how to live one's own life. When he finally paused, I said only, "We'll talk Friday." Enfu. He seemed satisfied, mistaking restraint for compliance. After he hung up, I wrote down every word he had said in my notebook. Auditors don't rely on memory alone. Documentation matters. That evening, I wandered the house as though seeing it anew. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked too loudly. The living room smelled faintly of Margaret's lavender candles, though I hadn't lit one in years. The dining room table still bore scratches from Ethan's homework sessions, the grooves of a boy pressing his pencil too hard on math problems I stayed up late to help him solve. Every detail whispered, "This is your life, not theirs." On Wednesday, Claire called. Her tone was sharper than Ethan's, her words clipped and deliberate. "Robert, I just want to be sure Friday doesn't become adversarial. If we go to court, conservatorship proceedings will make everything public. Your health, your finances, even your medical records. That's not what you want, is it?" Her voice was calm, polished, weaponized. She wanted me to feel cornered, to see court as humiliation rather than defense. When she finally paused, I answered evenly, "Claire, I audited companies with billions on the line. Do you think I scare that easily?" For the first time, I heard her hesitate. Just for a moment. Then her voice returned, steady but tighter. "We'll see you Friday." After she hung up, I allowed myself the faintest smile. Pressure only works on the unprepared. Thursday came and went in steady preparation. I rose early, walked the garden, and whispered to Margaret's roses. I told her about the fight ahead, about the numbers David had gathered, about how Ethan had forgotten every sacrifice we had made. The roses swayed in the breeze, as if listening. Margaret always said they were stubborn flowers, surviving winters that killed lesser blooms. I chose to take it as a sign. That afternoon, David brought over a thick folder. Inside, neatly tabbed and highlighted, was the financial map of Ethan's life. Every tuition check, every down payment, every loan and gift. David had even printed copies of thank you notes Ethan had written in his teenage years, before entitlement had replaced gratitude. "This is more than enough," David said grimly. "If they push, we'll push harder. If they claim you're unfit, we'll bury them in proof of just how much you've carried." I thanked him, but I didn't open the folder right away. Instead, I sat with it on my lap in the study, feeling its weight. It wasn't just paper. It was years. Decades. A ledger written in blood, sweat, and the quiet sacrifices Margaret and I had made for a boy who now called me a liability. That night, I walked through the house one last time before Friday. I touched the banister Margaret used to polish, the door frame where we had marked Ethan's height as he grew, the window she used to open on summer evenings to let the breeze in. I thought about how easily Claire had called it impractical, as though a lifetime could be reduced to inefficiency. At midnight, I returned to my study. I placed the folder on the desk, closed my eyes, and let the silence settle. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man nearing the end. I felt like a man preparing for the most important audit of his life. Friday was coming, and I was ready. Friday morning arrived grey and heavy. the sky low with clouds as though the world itself understood the weight of what was about to happen. I dressed carefully, dark slacks, a pressed shirt, the tie Margaret had once said made me look like a man who never loses. I stood before the mirror for a long moment, staring at the lines on my face, the silver in my hair. They might see age. I saw experience. They might see weakness. I saw resilience. David's office sat downtown, an old brick building with a brass nameplate polished to a shine. I had been there many times over the years, estate planning, tax questions, even when Margaret and I had signed our will together. The waiting room smelled of leather and coffee, the kind of place that reassured clients they were in steady hands. Ethan and Claire arrived precisely at 10, their footsteps echoing sharply on the hardwood floor. Ethan wore a tailored navy suit, his tie a shade too bold, the color of a man who wanted to dominate a room. Claire, in her charcoal grey dress and heels, carried her briefcase like a sword. They looked every inch the power couple, doctor and lawyer, certain the world bent in their direction. "Dad," Ethan said, giving me the faintest nod. Not warmth, not affection, just acknowledgement. "Robert," Claire added briskly, her voice cool. David emerged from his office, his presence calm but commanding. His salt and pepper hair, his firm handshake, the sharpness in his eyes. He was the kind of lawyer who didn't need to raise his voice to win. "Ethan, Claire," he said, extending a hand. "Let's get started." We entered the conference room. The table was long, polished mahogany, with neat stacks of paper already waiting. David gestured for me to sit at the head. I did. Ethan and Claire sat across from me, side by side, presenting a united front. Claire opened her briefcase, pulling out her own set of documents. "Robert," she began, sliding them across, "these are the papers we discussed. A quitclaim deed, adding Ethan and me as joint owners. It's the simplest way forward. We've also included provisions for your comfort guaranteed right of residence, joint financial management. Sign here and everything moves smoothly." Her words flowed like honey, smooth and practiced. She was confident enough not to look at David, as if dismissing him as a mere formality. Ethan leaned in. "Dad, this protects everyone. No fights, no court, no stress, just family under one roof. You'll thank us later." I looked at the documents without touching them. "You came prepared," I said softly. "Of course," Claire replied. "Preparation is everything." David cleared his throat. "Before Robert signs anything," he said evenly, "there are matters we need to review. Financial matters, historical matters, context." Ethan frowned. "This doesn't need to be complicated. We're just ensuring Dad's safety and—" "Safety?" David cut him off, his voice sharp for the first time. "Interesting word. Because from where I sit, the only thing unsafe here is the truth being ignored." Claire bristled. "David, let's not turn this into theatre. Conservatorship proceedings are very real. If Robert refuses to cooperate, we have no choice but to pursue them. Ethan has colleagues ready to provide testimony about his father's diminished capacity." "Capacity," David repeated, his eyes narrowing. He reached into the folder before him and withdrew a thick stack of papers bound neatly. He placed it on the table with deliberate weight. "Then let's test capacity, not in theory, but in practice. Let's review the numbers, shall we?" For the first time, Ethan looked uneasy. "What numbers?" "The numbers that built your life," David said. He opened the file and began sliding documents across the table one by one. Deerfield Academy, tuition, $85,000. Yale, $220,000. Medical school, $350,000, documented as a loan at 4% interest. With compounding, that's over $700,000 today. Beacon Hill condo, $120,000 down payment. First car, $15,000. Private practice loan, $85,000. Claire's eyes darted to the papers, scanning furiously. Ethan's face paled slightly, his jaw tightening. David's voice was relentless. Total, more than $1.6 million, adjusted for interest and inflation, nearly $2 million, every cent recorded, every check documented. Do these numbers look like the product of diminished capacity to you, Claire? Or do they look like the deliberate, consistent support of a father who built his son's future brick by brick? The room went silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Ethan's hand clenched into a fist on the table. Claire's professional mask slipped for the first time, her lips pressing into a hard line. I finally spoke, my voice calm but steady. Ethan, I carried you on my shoulders when you couldn't walk. I carried your tuition when you couldn't pay. I carried your dreams when you couldn't afford them. And now you come here with your wife and her briefcases, telling me I'm unfit, that I can't manage my own home. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came. His eyes flickered between the papers and my face, the confidence draining. Claire tried to recover, her tone sharper now. Robert, gifts from parent to child are not unusual. They don't erase the reality of aging. They don't change the law. These were not gifts, I said, leaning forward. These were investments, some repaid, most ignored, but everyone recorded. I am not incompetent, Claire. I am thorough. And if you push me to court, the entire world will see just how thorough I am. David slid one final paper across the table, a codicil to my will. And for clarity, he said, his voice firm, Robert has updated his estate plan. The house will not pass to Ethan. It will go to the Carter Foundation, funding scholarships in Margaret's name. If you wanted to inherit, Ethan, you should have remembered gratitude before greed. The words hit like a hammer. Ethan slumped back in his chair, his face drained of color. Claire's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. For the first time since they arrived, the silence belonged to me. I let it linger before speaking one final time. I was an auditor for 40 years. I never signed a contract I hadn't read line by line. Did you really think I would sign away my life without knowing exactly what it was worth? The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking the moment. Ethan lowered his eyes. Claire snapped her briefcase shut, the sound sharp and angry. The meeting was over, but the audit of my son's soul had only just begun. When I walked out of David's office that day, the sky had begun to clear. The heavy clouds were breaking apart, letting sunlight spill across the city streets. I stood there for a long while, breathing it in. For the first time in years, the weight on my chest felt lighter, not because Ethan had been defeated, not because Claire had been silenced, but because I had remembered who I was. Age has a way of convincing you that you're smaller than you used to be, that your worth is measured only in what you can no longer do. My son and his wife tried to make me believe that. They came armed with their professions, their arguments, their threats, hoping I would fold under the pressure of my own years. But what they forgot is that every wrinkle carries a story, every scar holds a lesson, and every year adds another layer of wisdom. Weakness wasn't what they found in me. What they found was strength built from a lifetime of surviving storms. As I drove home, I thought of Margaret. I could almost hear her laugh in the wind that rushed through the open window, see her smile in the sun setting over the horizon. She had always believed in standing tall, in guarding what mattered most, in never letting fear dictate the end of a story. That day, I honored her. That day, I chose dignity over surrender. And maybe Ethan will never understand. Maybe Claire will spin her own version of events. But that no longer matters, because the truth is simple. No one can steal the value of your life if you refuse to let go of it. So if you're listening to this, and you've ever felt like you were being pushed aside, like your years made you invisible, I want you to remember this. You are not a burden. You are the sum of every sacrifice, every lesson, every moment that carried you here. You are irreplaceable. Hold fast to that truth. Stand tall in it. Because the world may try to reduce you to numbers, but your worth has never been measurable on paper. And if this story has touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength, then stay with me, subscribe, share, and let's continue walking through these stories together. Because no one should ever forget, you still matter, you always will.